help us?
There are a lot of movies, like a whole lot. Over 100 years worth, with the past few decades allowing all sorts of new folks to step into the ring and try their hand at filmmaking. So it makes sense that some excellent horror movies might be passed over. Well, no more. Let's talk about the top 5 scariest horror movies nobody talks about. Disclaimer, I am aware that some people do talk about these movies. What, you don't get hyperbole? Alright. Coming in at number 5, we've got The Wax Mask. The first time I caught this, it was streaming on a Shudder channel, so I hopped in with zero context. Glad I did though, because this flick is gnarly. There's quite a bit of history to it too. In the 90s, legendary Italian director Dario Argento saw legendary Italian director Lucio Fulci's health was in decline. Argento worked with Fulci to develop a new project in which they would remake House of Wax. Unfortunately, Fulci died during the production, handing off the role of director to Sergio Stivoletti, a special effects artist. Stivoletti's influence is definitely felt throughout the film too, because these special effects are beyond nuts. Like, if you want to see some truly wild special effects, find yourself a copy of The Wax Mask and buckle up. It's the tale of a wax museum in a little Italian village and all the wonders it does for the community. And by wonders, I mean terrors. And by the community, I mean the bodies of assorted individuals about town. Did that make sense? I'm trying to say that there's a man kidnapping people after injecting them with some unknown substance via steampunk needle and then turning them into wax figures. Also, the man has a metal claw for an arm and tends to rip hearts right through chests, no problem. And you get to see all of it. Like, the gore in this movie is incredible. So much body horror. You get to see people hollowed out and turned into wax figures by some incredible dehydrating machine. Watch in terror as a man's skin melts away, revealing a Terminator-style metal skeleton. Every kill, every act of violence, every strange melty aside, it's all awesome. It's a crying shame more people haven't seen it. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, I implore you to go check it out immediately. Just don't expect any Oscar-winning performances, alright? Coming in at number 4, we've got Hellhouse LLC. Okay, so this one might actually get talked about a little bit, but still way less than it should. In my eyes, this is the kind of found footage movie that should be the yardstick by which other found footage flicks should be measured. It's not perfect, but it does get enough right within the found footage genre. It doesn't rub your nose in all the scares, and it doesn't rely on jump scares nearly as much as other movies tend to. And the fake documentary taking a look at the fake found footage angle is actually pretty effective, both in telling the story and in providing a creepy atmosphere. Hellhouse is the story of a failed haunted house organization. A group of friends head out to Rockland County outside of New York to convert an abandoned hotel into a Halloween attraction. What they don't know is that all sorts of sinister activity has occurred in the Abaddon Hotel over the years, and their leader, Alex, made a bit of a shady deal to acquire the real estate. All of this is slowly revealed over the course of the movie through footage they shoot on a camcorder and also through narrations by paranormal enthusiasts looking back at the event. See, from the get-go we know that the haunted house is doomed to be a disaster, but all the gnarly little details are expanded on over time. Creepy bits of Abaddon lore pop up and plenty of strange happenings keep the Hell House gang on their toes. It's restrained enough in its scares that it becomes genuinely chilling as you notice little things are off in the background of different shots, and you feel the characters get more and more paranoid. Plus, the hotel is just a straight up creepy location. Every time you think you have the lay of the land, some new disorienting element pops up and confuses you all over again. And the best part of all, Hellhouse LLC is followed up by 2 batshit insane sequels. Essentially extended lore dumps. These movies drive me crazy in the best possible way. Every loose end from the first Hell House is explored in a depth previously unimaginable, and it's all done up with like a budget that was obviously much smaller than the first movie and some actors that may or may not be able to carry their weight. It's the best thing ever. And considering all the hardcore horror movie theorists out there, not enough folks are discussing the lore of the Abaddon Hotel. Marathon the trilogy ASAP and let me know what you think. Coming in at number 3, we've got Splinter. The wicked monster in this movie is enough to warrant lengthy conversations, but that just doesn't seem to happen. Sure, it doesn't have the star power or legendary appeal of a lot of other more famous infectious monster lockdown movies, but it's wicked cool in its own right. A vacationing couple gets carjacked by an escaped convict and his substance-reliant girlfriend, and the 4 of them end up at a dingy gas station. The station, unfortunately, has been recently attacked by a horrifying splinter-covered creature that assimilates any flesh it can find into its own horrid body. The 4 folks must then lock down the gas station and survive until help arrives, but help doesn't know how to deal with the dark and dangerous threat any more than they do. Yikes. Splinter is a tight and tense horror movie with very little fat to trim. It's pretty much one location with some stressed out strangers having to be as resourceful as possible against a supernatural threat. It's by no means a storytelling masterpiece, but every character gets a chance to grow and change a little, and the monster itself is again incredible. It constantly changes form, becoming more wholly terrifying with each iteration, and the way it moves is just spine-tingling. The director worked one-on-one with a trained gymnast to develop some of the most inhuman movements they could manage, and it works like a charm. This is a prime-time example of what some dedicated and passionate filmmakers can make on a relatively small budget. It's a shame the industry seems to be moving away from stuff like this. Coming in at number 2, we've got Jigoku. Admittedly, this movie is probably less discussed these days because it came out in 1960, and when it comes to old school Japanese horror movies, there are a few more popular choices for the masses to talk about. But Jigoku deserves its time in the sun, or out of the sun I guess, because it's all about being sent to the Buddhist approximation of hell to suffer for eternity. I'm not so sure I'm qualified to say anything authoritatively about this movie, as it is just such a rich text full of all sorts of classical themes and influences, and there's so much going on here, so it's hard to totally summarize. But I'll try. A student, Shiro, is attempting to marry his girlfriend, who is also the daughter of his professor. In a horrible turn of events, he and his sketchy friend Tamura end up in a hit-and-run situation. They choose run, driving Shiro mad with guilt. His guilt causes him to accidentally crash his car later on, killing his fiancée. Of course, this doesn't help soothe his guilt in any way. Soon, Shiro's mother falls ill and he heads out to her remote community to see her. There, he discovers an elaborate web of sinning, with each community member guilty of some sort of heinous act. These sins all come to a head at a lavish party where more or less everyone in town dies from either tainted food, poison, or at the hands of somebody else they have wronged. But death is not the end for these sinners. Jigoku awaits, and Jigoku is equal parts visually stunning and viscerally horrifying. The craftsmanship in the sets alone is worth an essay or two, and that's not even taking into account the camera work that so beautifully displays it. Jigoku is an incredible work of art that somehow has fallen off a lot of horror fans' radars. Coming in at number 1, we've got Nobody Sleeps in the Woods Tonight. It is strange how little folks seem to talk about this brand new Netflix horror from Poland. Like, it just came out, is plenty scary, and manages to be subversive and traditional at the same time. Apparently I'm in the minority that thought it was fantastic, so today I'm gonna try to make a case for it. Nobody Sleeps in the Wood Tonight is about a tech-cleansed camp for teens. Their parents send them out to the middle of nowhere to ditch their technology and make some new person-to-person connections. Should be fun, right? Well, it is, until a horrific mutated monster makes it out of its mother's cellar. Then it's a desperate fight for their lives. Plenty of twists here too. I won't go too in depth because half of the fun of this movie is getting caught off guard, and let's just say that there's more going on than you might think. It flips all sorts of tropes upside down without being too tongue-in-cheek or fourth wall breaky, which is actually a nice change of pace. Plus, there is some absolutely gnarly gore here. Top-notch gross out moments for sure. Maybe I'm not paying close enough attention, but it seems as though most folks have sort of passed this one by without a second thought. So let's talk about it. Well, by making this video, I have invalidated the title. Somebody has talked about these horror movies, unless you consider me a nobody, which, you know, I'd understand. So what did you think of the list? Have you discussed these flicks? What horror movies don't get enough attention? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's have a look at some of your more heroic ones from the top 5 horror movies that deserve another chance. Nicholas Kaufman says PPFA, the Pretentious People's Film Club. Association. For now, we'll call it a Freudian slip, although someday I'll be able to claim that it was an extremely well-planned joke. Candy Pate says Chainsaw Massacre is a true story. It was a guy with a chainsaw killing people in Texas. You can look it up, it's a true story. Hold the phone. You're telling me that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based on a dude killing people with a chainsaw in Texas? Caitlin Lee Hagar says, I remember when I first saw The Ring, I couldn't stand it. A good friend of mine talked me into watching it a second time, and now it's one of my favorite movies. Second chances, baby! Sherio88 says, love the Dune reference at the end. Just finished reading Dune. I just got through Messiah, heading on to Children of Dune soon. And Michael Murphy says, love this channel. And we love you, Michael. And that's all the time we have for today. I'm gonna go play the Forbidden Harmonica solo. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
When it comes to horror, there are so many different avenues you can go down. There's some big budget things that have splurts of blood and people dying all over the place. But if you dig into the mud a little bit, you will find some gems that have been lost and truly can scare you to your core. Today, we're gonna dig up some of these gems, and we're gonna look at which ones might be the best. I'm your host, Che Durana, and we have all of this on today's top 5 scary list. Coming in at number 5, we have Freaks, a classic horror movie that many of the modern horror movie lovers will have no idea about. Let's put it this way, if this movie was made today, it would not only be extremely hard to watch, but it would be one of the most controversial films of our time. Freaks is about a trapeze performer who comes up with a scheme to walk away with millions of dollars. She ends up getting in with the sideshow performers at the circus and learns that one of the dwarfs, who is married, is secretly rich and has a stockpile of money waiting for him after his parents die. She uses her beauty to get in close with him, and eventually he turns on his wife and falls in love with this con artist. But when the plan is revealed and the dwarf learns that he's been tricked, well, our lovely trapeze artist is in for a horrible punishment that is one of the peak moments in horror movies. Now, this movie was made in 1932, and most of the people in the film are real sideshow workers and have severe disabilities. Even back in 1932, the movie was criticized for taking advantage of people with disabilities for the benefit of the movie. So if people felt like that almost 100 years ago, then you can only imagine how the movie would have an effect on people now. The film was actually banned in a few countries because they found it too hard for audiences to watch, and governments thought it was too disturbing and shouldn't be seen as entertainment. And just so we're clear, the vision that was made in theaters was much less graphic than the original. The original film was actually shown to focus groups and they couldn't make it through the movie, so it was edited down to be more palatable. I actually have seen this movie. I got a box set of horror movies and I had no idea what it was when I started watching it. There are a couple moments in that movie that still stick in my head, and it's been about 10 years since I've seen it, just so you have an idea of how jarring some of the imagery in that movie can be. Coming at number 4, we have It's Alive. When birth control in the 70s was a new thing on the market, people were very afraid of what the effects could be, and they should have been, because it turns out that many of them were harmful. But It's Alive takes this fear and runs with it in one of the strangest ways possible. A woman who was on a pharmaceutical contraceptive somehow gets pregnant, and the baby that is born turns out to be some sort of hideous monstrosity that just can't be killed. Even though it should have been killed the second it was out of the womb, it slithers away like the xenomorph from Alien, and then people are on the hunt to take it out. 3 groups of people are chasing this thing down, one of them being the baby's father, who I can only assume feels some sort of responsibility for the creature that is now loose and terrorizing the world, another being the pharmaceutical company who made the birth control. I mean, they want to get out there and cover this up before the news gets word that their pill will cause women to give birth to killer mutant babies that have an endless lust for blood. The CEO of that company was probably freaking out because he doesn't want the stock price of his company to go into the toilet. That would be bad for the look of the company. And the last group that is chasing down this rugrat from hell would be the police. They are just trying to do their job. In the end, the police kill the youngest killer in the world, and right when the viewers think it's time to kick back and feel a wave of relief wash over their body, the police get a call that another baby like this was born in Seattle. Whoa! Honestly, a pretty solid way to end a horror movie. Coming in at number 3, we have Possum. Now for our next point, we're going to jump across the pond and look at one of the most bizarre horror movies in recent years. No, not every movie on this list is going to be something that was made decades ago. Possum is a British movie that is directed by famed comedy writer Matthew Holness. And if Get Out has taught us anything, it's that comedy writers have a pretty good understanding of how to make a good horror movie. My theory is that both comedy and horror use the same basic principles. They are both about creating and releasing tension. Well, in the movie Possum, there is a whole lot of tension. The movie is about a puppeteer who has lost his job and takes this opportunity to go back to his hometown and try and deal with his trauma. And the whole movie centers around that, which is trauma. I won't get into too much detail as to what happened to this puppeteer, but just know that this is a very dark, disturbing horror movie with imagery that will make you look away from the screen, and the trauma comes from his childhood and events that happened between him and his uncle. Now, probably the most unsettling creature in this whole thing is what would be seen as some sort of movie monster, but is only visible to the main character. In an attempt to break free from his trauma, the puppeteer has forced his traumatic experiences into a psychological puppet that comes to life in his mind. This thing looks like it has the face of the nun and a body of a spider. Throughout the movie, you learn that this creature will haunt him forever, and the final message seems to be that you can never escape your trauma, but you can learn to live with it. The movie leaves you with a lot of unanswered questions, which is good for horror. You want to feel leaving a little bit uneasy. By the end of the movie, you'll be confused, scared, and worried that some thoughts from your past will manifest into a being that will haunt you until you're in a hole in the ground. Or I guess you could just try to bury them all and ignore your inside problems like most people do. Coming in at number 2, we have Possession. One of the weirdest horror movies that you will ever come across, but the whole thing is a wild ride that I recommend people jump onto. The Possession, at its core, is about two people going through a divorce, and let me just tell you that the movie is very different from Marriage Story. For one, there are no memes about it. Well, the movie follows a man and woman as they split up, and the whole experience is devastating for the two of them. There are several scenes in the movie where the female lead, Isabel Ingani, is expressing herself in the most over-the-top dramatic way you could imagine. Her counterpart, Sam Neill, is trying to quell these outcries in a way to control her and keep her for himself. That's partly why the movie is called Possession. The other reason that the movie is called Possession is because there's a whole lot of God talk throughout the movie and some sort of demonic monstrosity covered in blood that is creepy enough to make you want to sleep with the lights on. The whole movie is shot and acted like a dramatic Greek play. You have swooping camera zoom-ins that take too long and breakdowns that take way too long. From a classic horror perspective, the movie might be a little too strange for you. If you're looking for a horror movie that's just going to walk you down a road to a creepy monster and have a couple of lustful 20-somethings killed in a car because they got a little too handsy, well then this is not going to be the movie for you. But if you're craving something a little bit more bizarre and something that can be considered a very art-housey movie, and you like it when bloody monsters kill things, then you should jump into this one because it's one hell of a ride. And coming into the number 1 spot, we have Creep. Creep is probably the movie that makes people at home terrified because it builds a villain that is so believable. It will have you locking your doors and windows and never accepting an invitation to someone's cottage again. Now, even though this one is more popular than some of the other movies on this list, it's still a hidden gem for most people. I think deep horror fans have all seen this movie, but if you have a friend who is just starting to get into the genre, then you are going to want to get them into this movie quickly. I put this movie so high on the list because I love found footage horror. It's one of my favorite types. I think it's because the movie feels so real, and part of what makes the slowly unveiling psycho so menacing are the awkward moments that you're forced to watch. And because the movie is about a filmmaker who is asked to go to a cabin in the woods with a stranger so he can film his will and the end of his life, our spooky cabin owner is apparently dying, those awkward moments become frightening because you have to be stuck with the person alone. What would it be like to be captured with someone who's extremely weird and they do something you would normally just walk away from, but now you have to stay and look at them in the face for who knows how long. Alright guys, that has been our list. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I have been your host, Chaderena, and we'll catch you on the next one. Did I say number 10 at the beginning?
I don't think so, but we do.
Okay, just in case. Coming in at number 5, we have Freaks. I mean, they want to get out there and cover this stuff up before the nude. I mean, they want to get out there and cover this up before the. Possum is a British movie that is. Sorry. Yeah, this whole.
Sometimes awesome movies go under the radar. I know, it's an unimaginable tragedy, but in a world so jam-packed with flicks and with so much media that competes with feature films, it's easy to see why. Thankfully, we can all put our heads together and share the best of the best that may or may not have gone unnoticed. It's time to talk about the top 5 scariest horror movies nobody talks about, part 3. Before we get started, I just want to shout out our newest channel, Viper Girl. It's a gaming channel that's going to be making videos on everything from Minecraft to FNAF to Cyberpunk, so make sure you head on over and subscribe so you don't miss an upload.
Oh my gosh, I almost died. I thought you were a cactus, my friend. I thought you were a cactus. We've got iron, baby. Yes. Okay, my main goal is to blow up and then act like I don't know nobody. Bro, no, I'm gonna fight you with a pork chop. No, come here. This is awesome.
Wicked, on with the list. Coming in at number 5, we've got Hagazussa. If you're a fan of Robert Eggers' work over the last half-decade or so, this is a movie you should have on your list. Slow and steady is the name of the game here, with plenty to soak in before the real scares start swinging. Some folks have compared this to The Witch, which is a pretty fair connection to make. It's a period piece largely focusing on a recluse who has trouble adjusting to life away from society. There's whispers of witchcraft, plus the title is literally another word for witch. There's goats too. All the elements required to compare something to The Witch is there, but Hagazussa is quite unique in its own right. The story takes place in a remote village in the 15th century Alps. Of course, this means that the movie is ridiculously gorgeous, like stunning natural vistas, beautiful mountaintop shots, and more. This natural beauty, though, is contrasted by the actual events happening. We follow a young woman, Albrun, as she lives an isolated life from childhood. Her mother was seen as the local witch and not really trusted by anyone. Locals would make their way out to their secluded shack just to torment the young fatherless family. Eventually, Albrun's mother falls ill and starts to act unlike herself. She cannot care for Albrun anymore and disappears into the woods in the middle of the winter. Albrun discovers her mother's body the next spring and must become self-sufficient. We then jump forward and follow an adult Albrun, now a single mother herself. She lives in the same shack, tending to her goats and caring for her baby. This lifestyle doesn't sit well with the locals though, who berate her whenever she comes into town. She strikes up an unlikely and uneasy friendship with a woman named Swinda, but it doesn't end very well. The cruelty of people becomes very clear to Albrun, who finally decides to turn to what isolated her mother from the rest of society: witchcraft. After communing with the skull of her dead mother, Albrun begins to act strangely and sees the world very differently than she used to. And from that moment on, the world becomes much more terrifying. Hagazussa is one hell of a slow burn, but the gorgeous cinematography and haunting soundtrack provide a spellbinding backdrop that keeps you invested. As each event unfolds, feelings of unease and dread rise. You want Albrun to live a happy, if lonely life, but the world just doesn't want to let her. And once she makes the decision to leave communal life behind, there is no going back. The final stretch of this movie is impossible to forget and full of dark hidden meaning. I can only assume that less people talk about this one because it's a German period piece, but if any of what I just said speaks to you, definitely give this movie a watch. Hey folks, just a reminder to give this video a big thumbs up, it really helps with the algorithm. On with the video. Coming in at number 4, we've got Grave Encounters. You know I've got to shout out this Canadian found footage supernatural horror, all of those categories speak to me. And it seems that even less people have regular conversations about Grave Encounters than Hellhouse, which is crazy. So please, if you're a found footage fan, give this a watch and talk about it. We need more Canadian films brought up in conversation if we have any hope of staying relevant. Interestingly enough, when this movie came out, its trailer was a surprise hit. It racked up over 30 million views, which might not seem like all that much now, but in 2011, that was a big deal. I'll stop hyping up the surrounding circumstances now and get to the actual movie. We follow a TV crew who has decided to investigate an old abandoned medical facility. They made 5 episodes of their show, Grave Encounters, before the previous crew went missing during a shoot. Their new crew wants to follow up on what happened and makes their way to the Collingwood Psychiatric Hospital. Let's be real though, abandoned psych wards are a pretty classic creepy location, and especially when they're being investigated found footage style. Hell, there's a whole genre of YouTube content dedicated to exactly that kind of experience. Shoutouts Top 10 Central Dark. Of course, when they all arrive at the hospital, nothing is as it seems. For a little while, nothing seems to happen, feeding into a lot of people's skepticism, but boy, that doesn't last long. As it turns out, the head doctor at this facility performed all sorts of experimental and immoral procedures on his patients, causing their tortured spirits to stick around long after their untimely deaths. And these lobotomized loonies aren't too happy that folks are coming to visit. The crew can't resist the horrific pull of the hospital and become patients in their very own ways. Exits open to reveal infinite other hallways, and the day-night cycle stops making any sense at all. It's creepy, claustrophobic, and all around gnarly. Again, if found footage is up your alley, this is a quality pick. The descent into madness is careful and calculated, but provides plenty of over-the-top scares for all to enjoy and ruin your couch upholstery too. Plus, if you need a reminder, it'll definitely ensure that you're careful when around old abandoned buildings. Coming in at number 3, we've got Let's Scare Jessica to Death. Here's a true classic that was near impossible to watch for years, and not just because it's legitimately scary. See, Let's Scare Jessica to Death is a very interesting case study. Released in 1971, it was around in an era where horror wasn't all that economically successful. A lot of stuff was pretty schlocky at the time, and folks didn't tend to take scary flicks too seriously. The script for this movie was originally supposed to be satirical, following a group of hippies getting attacked by a lake monster. But when director John Hancock got a hold of it, he decided to make it a much more straightforward story. By adding in some inspiration gleaned from The Turn of the Screw and The Haunting, Hancock made a much more psychologically distressing movie. You can't quite trust Jessica, as from the beginning her mental state is called into question. This allows folks to fill in the blanks themselves. And as horror scholars tend to understand, people's imaginations will come up with stuff way scarier than any on-screen monster. However, at the time of release, a lot of folks overlooked these qualities and criticized it for being too sparse. Over time, it would become a cult hit though. The thing about cult hits from the 70s is that they're usually pretty hard to find a print of. This remained the case up until very recently, with home video copies of the movie being near impossible to track down. Thankfully, Scream Factory did release a Blu-ray last year. Even so, not enough people are talking about this formative, terrifying psychological slasher from the 70s. Coming in at number 2, we've got Lovely Molly. All you really need to know about this one is that that name is fun to say. Say it 5 times fast and you tell me you don't get a little dopamine to the dome. Okay, it's not really the only thing you need to know about this movie, I just thought it was a fun little exercise. What you actually need to know about Lovely Molly is that it's scary as hell. It's written and directed by Eduardo Sanchez of the Blair Witch Project fame, which you would think would cause it to be talked about more, but that's not the case. The Wikipedia article is actually pretty barren, so if you have extremely deep Lovely Molly knowledge, the internet would love your help. For now though, let's just informally talk about what makes Lovely Molly work. It's the tale of a young couple, Molly and Tim, returning to Molly's childhood home. It's always a red flag in horror, eh, when you go back to the childhood home? Lots of ghosts, lots of demons. So Molly is a recovering heroin addict, which tends to get in the way of her making a compelling case about the strange happenings around her. She also participates in plenty of strange happenings herself and doesn't offer much in terms of a coherent reason as to why. Mysterious shrines are discovered under sheds, neighboring families are monitored and recorded for unknown sinister reasons, demonic presences seem to rule Molly's life. It's a genuinely disturbing and horrifying movie with plenty of wild moments. All it needs is a fresh audience and folks can definitely talk about it some more. And coming in at number 1, we've got Noroi, The Curse. If you know, you know. This is probably one of the best found footage movies of all time. It's measured and careful in what it reveals and when. And by doing so, it manages to infuse the world's creepiest atmosphere into an already unsettling story. It just seems as though nobody really talks about it when discussing found footage at large. If you're not a big found footage person, this movie might change your mind. It doesn't rely on jump scares or shoddy camera work to excuse poor planning and execution. It uses these conventions to its advantage, all the while telling a compelling, mysterious tale. We learn about a documentary filmmaker named Masafumi Kobayashi, who was at one point working on a project known as The Curse. During the production of this film, Kobayashi disappeared and his house burned down. Most of the movie concerns itself with the footage he shot before disappearing, detailing the lives of folks affected by supernatural forces. The story starts small, with the investigation of a woman who seems to attract negative energy, but as more details about this woman are revealed, the tale becomes much more dark and complex. Noroi manages to pack all sorts of horrific details and intricate storylines into a 2-hour package. Most found footage movies keep it simple, as ones who aspire higher often fail to hold the audience's attention or get lost in the details. This movie, however, avoids these pitfalls, resulting in a compulsively rewatchable mockumentary full of some truly spine-tingling moments. After watching it all, you may very well feel as though the story was something that actually happened. It didn't, but the feeling is hard to shake. Hopefully I managed to introduce some lesser-known flicks to everyone's backlog, and if I didn't, well, I did my best. We can't all be underground aficionados. So, what'd you think of the list? Have you seen any of these? All of them? What horror movies deserve some more time in the spotlight? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more hysterical ones from the top 5 biggest SCP monsters. The White Wolf says, I was actually wondering what that shirt was, and yes, I come from Texas, can confirm the introduction. Oh, it's Morbid Stuff by Pup. Listen to Pup. Kahana Lewis says, if one of the SCPs can take over your brain when you learn about it, why are you telling us about it? I'll let you ponder that one for a little while. Jonathan Doughboy says, if you like big, head on down to Red Lobster and check out SCP-5909, the Endless Shrimp. Garlic butter and bread? Day Day Landers says, we are going to die. Well, someday, yes, but I find it's nice to be at peace with it and then enjoy your time here while you can. And Stay the Spaniard says, why are you always wearing hats? That's another thing I can just pull out here. I'm always wearing hats because I like them. And that's all the time we have for today. I'm gonna go pick a fight at the local all-you-can-eat buffet. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Can we really say that nobody talks about these horror movies if we're talking about them right now? It sort of feels like asking if a tree makes a sound if it falls when nobody's around. It's paradoxical and perplexing. It's a good thing that all these movies are scary enough to make you forget about all that. You know it's time for the top 5 scariest horror movies nobody talks about, part 4. Coming at number 5, we've got Fingers. If you're looking to have all expectations thrown out the window, stomped on by somebody in biker boots, and then lit on fire with a can of hairspray and a knockoff Bic lighter, then this movie is for you. I honestly don't know if I can summarize the plot, but believe me when I say it's worth it to stick around through all the weirdness. Seriously, if you want to be thoroughly disturbed, surprised, and fascinated, give Fingers a watch. Apparently it's also known as Work Sticks, which I guess is a little more search engine friendly. Try searching for Fingers without adding the year or the word movie. You'll get a nice stock image of everyone's favorite digits. Okay, so enough about Google compatibility and more about the movie. Let's talk about what makes it so wild and why more people should be talking about it. Fingers is about a woman, Amanda, who has a lot of problems dealing with the imperfections on bodies that aren't hers. She finds herself unable to deal with the thought of having a baby because if it were to have any sort of deformity, she can't be sure she'd be able to live with it. She can't deal with other people that look strange to her, so often she'll run screaming from certain types of folks just trying to live their lives. And then there's Walter. Walter is Amanda's coworker at a mental health app startup. One day he shows up to work missing a finger and tries to play it off like it's nothing. Like blood on the keyboard, bone exposed to the air, but he just wants to get back to work. Don't talk about it. Amanda cannot handle this and has a meltdown. And from there, the story splits off in a bunch of different directions and they all become these weird overlapping stories. We learn the story behind Walter's missing finger, which soon becomes missing fingers. And there's a self-help therapist who seems to make a living on ludicrously overpriced books with the message, "Kill your fears." A panda-masked cannibal runs amok, locking people in storage crates, drinking $12 beers, and wielding bolt cutters. All of these weird and wild characters eventually interact in explosive, bloody, and despicable ways, resulting in a series of murders nobody can really guarantee actually happened. And Walter? Well, Walter ends up with 9 fingers in the trash and a whole lot of questions. Fingers is a movie that needs to be seen to be believed. And at that point, it's still hard to believe. The first 20 odd minutes of this movie are decidedly awkward and hard to follow, but after taking in the whole experience, it opens right up to all sorts of different interpretations. It's definitely not for everyone, but I dream of a world in which all sorts of fruitful conversations about chaos, self-importance, and the awful reality of being born with a body. Go watch this movie. Coming in at number 4, we've got Housebound. On the other end of the weird horror movie spectrum, we've got the outlandishly funny Housebound. But just because there are some funny moments here doesn't mean that this Kiwi horror flick isn't truly terrifying. It takes a couple twists and turns that I wish I could forget just so I can go and see it again for the first time. See, Housebound takes what appears to be a haunted house movie and turns it on its head. Kicking off with a young woman being put on house arrest and outfitted with an ankle monitor, it is a tale of homecoming and adult loneliness. Poor Kylie just wanted to steal an ATM, but now she's forced to take up residence with her mother and stepfather. She quickly realizes that the house has some strange quirks and soon comes to the conclusion that it might be haunted by a ghost. Or is it? See, there's more than meets the eye to each and every character in this movie. That is a bit that I think is definitely worth talking about. The whole message behind it is things aren't as they seem, and it commits to this message hardcore. Each person you meet has 2 sides at least, and the house itself is hiding plenty of secrets. And these secrets are where things get really scary. Is it a ghost? Or has something even more sinister taken up residence in the dusty walls? Could someone be living in the shadows, spying on the family, eating their food, taking their things? That is a personal fear of mine, finding out that someone's been squatting in my home while I lived there. Yeah, I'd have to move or something. And then there's the cold terror induced by bureaucracy and power structures and how they affect those caught up in the justice system. It might seem like a more general lifetime fear, but it plays out much more stabby and spooky in Housebound, trust me. I caught the last half of this movie in passing one day and then watched it in full later on and was super surprised I hadn't heard much about it. So go give it a watch and see how many hidden personalities you can pick out. Coming in at number 3, we've got Lose. This is a mindfuck, plain and simple. Clocking in at around 70 minutes, it barely qualifies as a feature, but that short runtime only adds to the confusing, dreamlike quality of this flick. It reminds viewers of Lynch at times, of classic giallo films from the 70s at others, all tied together with stylish cinematography and hypnotic visuals, of course. Luz is about a demonic possession that comes back seemingly out of nowhere. A cabbie had summoned a demon back in her days as a schoolgirl, and now it has come to collect. But it doesn't play out like any other kind of possession movie. No exorcist comes right out and says there's a demon here. That plays out in a number of flashbacks that melt into the plot currently happening. When two characters leave the bar to find the cabbie, the demon appears to make its way from person to person. The order in which this happens is questionable, and the motivations of each character are totally up for interpretation. Even so, Luz draws you in and keeps you there for the entirety. In fact, the short runtime probably helps in keeping folks around for the whole experience. Any longer and people might get confused and shut it off for lack of coherent plot. But as is, it is a fascinating movie and well worth a discussion. And of course, there are some truly freaky moments woven throughout. It made a splash at a few festivals and turned some heads when it was picked up by Shudder, but I haven't heard too much about it since then. So go start those conversations, won't you? Coming in at number 2, we've got Dolls. Of all these Stuart Gordon horror flicks out there, I feel as though Dolls gets the least amount of love. All of the Lovecraft adaptations are buoyed by the 80s horror charm and eldritch mega fans. His sci-fi stuff is in a class of its own, really, and of course there's King of the Ants, which dabbles in neo-noir extremism. So where does Dolls fit in? Maybe somewhere between Society and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids? It's odd, to say the least. But if you've ever been freaked out by a creepy miniature or a truly horrific old doll, then this movie will make your blood run cold. Playing out like a fairy tale of sorts, lauding the benefits of remaining a child at heart and punishing those who might be fueled by greed or spite. And the punishments doled out to those who don't fit the description of joyful and innocent are quite obscene. A mansion full of living dolls would indeed be a good place to kill some sinners, eh? Folks get tossed out of windows, stabbed with tiny weapons, and of course turn into horrid miniature versions of themselves. Oh, what fun. What it lacks in complexity, Dolls makes up for in visual terror. Seriously, the dolls and the other toy-like companions are a total nightmare, and when they start moving, that terror gets kicked up to a whole new level. So if you've seen Reanimator or From Beyond and want some more of that Stuart Gordon magic, look no further than the generally underappreciated Dolls. It's not Lovecraft, and the body horror is toned down a little bit compared to a lot of the other work, but boy, is it a freaky little number. And finally at number 1, we've got Marrowbone. With a world-class cast and a horrific late-game realization for the ages, Marrowbone is a wonderfully tragic horror story. This is director Sergio G. Sanchez doing what he does best. If you've seen his breakout horror movie, The Orphanage, then you probably have a pretty good idea of what you're gonna get here. A moody, tightly wound period piece with all sorts of secrets to be uncovered. 4 siblings are forced to move to their mother's ancestral home following a violent string of crimes committed by their father. Soon after, their mother dies, and in order to stay together, the Marrowbone siblings must keep up the appearance that she's still alive. The eldest child, Jack, takes on the role of the breadwinner and protector. He notices that the old house contains some sort of malevolence and comes up with different rituals in order to keep his siblings safe. But over time, pressures from the outside world leak in, and he's unable to keep up the facade of peace. This is a movie that benefits greatly from a second watch, and all sorts of previously sneaky details become a whole lot more obvious. I don't want to say too much more, as the first watch is definitely a roller coaster, but Marrowbone is amazing and apparently underrated. More people should be talking about it. So get to talking. I want these movies discussed until there's no discussion left, alright? Well, maybe don't take it that far, but they're definitely all jam-packed with interesting stuff. So what'd you think of the list? Have you seen any of these? What's a criminally underrated flick that you wish got more airtime? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more gaseous ones from the top 5 haunted roads you should never drive on. Santiago E. Juarez Martinez says, me, putting all the directions into my GPS. You can't stop me. I mean, you're right, I can't stop you, but I can give you a stern warning. DJ Legendary says, thumbs down on the Jersey joke. Well, that sounds exactly like something someone from Jersey who can't take a joke would say. PDL says, I won't say which one, but I can 1000% vouch for one of these. Come on, tell us which one. And Ian Cameron is making me wonder if he's a demon. That's all the time we have for today. I'm going to air fry some plastic explosives. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. But it's a good thing, nope, I'm not gonna say but, you know, it's time, nope, very up to interpretation. A panda-masked criminal a panda-masked cannibal, lose. His sci-fi stuff is in a class of its own, really, and no